Good afternoon and welcome to this week's edition of the People Progressing podcast. I am over the moon today with John O'Leary. You're going to be amazed by his story. You're going to be inspired and you're going to start living your life differently after you listen to this. I'm fully convinced of that. John, thanks for coming on. And how I always start every podcast is I just ask my guest to kind of describe where you grew up, how you grew up, what'd you like to do as a kid, some influences you had, and so forth.
Yeah, well, good morning and hello, Joe. It's good to see you today again. As far as where I grew up in St. Louis, Missouri. I am one of six. My father was an attorney. My mother was a teacher, although she mostly stayed home. We had dogs and cats and turtles and birds, and all that's kind of surprising because my mom hated animals. So that tells you a lot about the kind of mom I had. She really was awesome. Just a good mom, even doing things she didn't naturally like. I love being outside. I love being on a bike, having a glove on my left hand and a baseball on my right. Love being with my friends. Hated doing homework, hated schoolwork, and expected as I got older that I would play baseball for the St. Louis Cardinals.
That is awesome. It's really sounds exactly like my childhood. That's exactly what I used to do. John, it all changed when you were 9. Why don't you go through that story? You can describe the story a lot better than I can, but your life changed dramatically at 9 years old. Why don't you describe that to us?
Yeah. And the weird thing about this whole story is it's one we overlooked and ignored for decades, which is shocking, in particular, once you hear the story. But we as a family never talked about what you're asking right now. I think because it was too painful and we were just trying to move on. So at age 9, I had seen little boys in my neighborhood playing with fire and gasoline. They were doing it on a sidewalk. I looked up to these boys. They were 11. I was 9, assumed if they could do it, I could as well. So on a Saturday morning at about 7:30, walked into the garage. Mom and dad are both at work. The house was mine. Went over to a can of gasoline, 5 gallons. That's 42 pounds, Joe.
Yeah.
Too heavy to pick up. So I set the little flame that I had in my left hand on the concrete floor. I bear hugged this red canister and slowly started tipping it, waiting for liquid to come out, trying to duplicate this experiment. And before the liquid, of course, came the fumes. It pulled my flame into the can. Massive explosion erupted. It launched me 20 feet against the far side of the garage, set my world on fire. I remember waking up on the far side of the garage, looking down, and I was on fire. And I knew it. And then I'm looking around and everything's on fire. And we were all taught and trained what to do when we are on fire as kids, which of course, stop, drop, and roll. But what do you do when everything's on fire? Like the air is on fire. Everything's on fire. So I just ran. I ran for my life, eventually made it back into the house. I stood on top of a rug. We have pictures of all this stuff online, like just painful to even look at. Stood on top of a rug, screaming for a hero, praying for a savior. And I saw my brother Jim coming toward me. I can't remember if I've shared this with you before in the past, but as Jim is racing toward me, he's 17, I'm 9. I'm thinking, anybody else, man. I need a hero. I need someone who knows what they're going to do here, not my brother Jim. And yet this was his moment to shine. He picked up a rug. He beat down the flames. He burned himself in the process, carried me outside, threw me on the ground, jumped on top of me, rolled around several times in the snow, and saved my life. So it's the beginning of a grueling, agonizing, long, and beautiful, redemptive, miraculous story of life.
It's an amazing story. I want to dive a little bit into Jim. What is your relationship like with Jim? Did it change a lot after that incident?
Yeah.
Did it change Jim? What kind of transformation did it have on Jim? Things like this really make us look at life in a different viewpoint, have a different perspective. What kind of viewpoint do you think it gave Jim?
So we'll start with the end and then move forward to closer to the fire. But my brother Jim today is an attorney, personal injury. He wants to represent people who have been in one way or another unfairly hurt. He happens, I think, although he never talks about it, to do very well financially. But that's not at all what motivates him. So he's lasered in on a why of serving. That grew out of that fire. That grew out of how things can happen in people's lives. That changed not only their life, but the life of everybody in their family. So that's why he does what he does today. And I think it's why he does it well, Joe. He also has 3 kids. A couple of them were born with some special needs. The old brother Jim that I knew and loved as a 17-year-old would have struggled mightily with that diagnosis, with those struggles. Today, he is a loving father. He's a good man. He's a great brother. So yeah, the story certainly changed his life today. Back then, how did it change us? I'm sorry, I'm dealing with a little bit of a cold.
Oh,
So
you're good. You're good.
bear with me. But back then, the first person, not named mom, dad, nurse, janitor, doctor, or Jack Buck to visit me was my brother Jim. So about 6, maybe 7 weeks in, my eyes are finally opening up. So it took a while to even see, but my eyes are slowly opening. My voice still won't work, sort of like this podcast today. My voice won't work at all. They have a trachea, so I can't talk, but I could click. So I learned by that point to like click on a board. So my mother would point to letters, and when she got to the right letter, I would click. It took forever. I'm a horrible speller. I'm on morphine. I'm in pain. This was a mess, but it worked kind of. So the first visitor I get is Jim. He walks into the room and I call for the board, and it took forever, but eventually I click out, "You are my hero." So, an emotional first conversation with my brother, and he deflected it and said, "Oh, I'm not a hero. You're the one doing all the hard work. Keep fighting." And just a sweet, tender conversation between two brothers who 6 weeks previously hated each other in this sibling type of way. Man, we
Yeah.
we didn't get
Yeah.
along. We fought all the time.
Yeah. And I want to go back again. The doctors gave you a less than 1% chance to live. I've heard some interviews with your mom, and she stated in that interview that the doctors gave you a less than 1% chance to live, and your body was burned 100% over your body. Is
Yes.
am I right in saying that?
Like only one little detail. It's so small, but I think it matters. 100% body burn, 87% third degree. So this is a massive burn, even today, but in particular back in 1987. The little minor detail is this: the doctor said that he has less than 1% chance of surviving the first night. And then she said, and the doc, and those odds will never, ever go up. Meaning, this little boy, this one that you brought into the world and raised for 9 years, will not survive, will not live.
Yeah. Amazing. Then your mom came in and you asked your mom a question. What was that question and how did she respond?
Yeah, I mean, the whole story, it's so, in my faith view, so God inspired, because none of it is us. Like my brother Jim, that's not him. What my little sisters did in the front yard, that's not them. How my dad responded, it's not him. And now to my mom, it's certainly not her. I'm in pain. I'm struggling. I'm looking for hope, which I think anybody would be in the situation in an ER in pain. And I looked at her after she was sweet to me. She walks in and says, "I love you, baby. I love you, baby." So I said, "Mom, knock it off with the love. Am I going to die? Am I going to die?" And I assumed she would say, "No, you're not going to die. You're going to be fine. We'll get you out of here this afternoon. We'll swing you through Steak and Shake on the way home." But that morning, Joe, she gave me truth. You as a leader, you understand the value of this.
Mm-hmm.
But many of us, I think, clamor for false hope. We want Trump or Biden or whoever's next to him, just make it all okay for us.
Mm-hmm.
When what is required in these days and during all days is just honesty. And then the idea of you take responsibility for your part of it. That's a big piece of leadership. So my mother, with my broken right hand in hers, looks me in the eyes and says, "Baby, do you want to live? It's your choice. It's not mine." So it's completely deflecting this, but ultimately making me assume responsibility here. And I said, "Mom, I don't want to die. I want to live. I want to live." So she goes, "Good. Then look, babe, take the hand of God, walk the journey with him, and you fight like you never fought before. Your dad and I will be with you. You're not alone, but do your part. Fight. And Joe,
Um,
that was day one in the ER before we'd been in the burn center, before we met the burn doc of this 5.5 month journey in hospital, years of recovery medically. But I credit so much of that long journey to that first conversation.
and I want to say this. I truly believe that as human beings, we do have a superpower. And that superpower is the power of choice. And what your mom tapped into there was your superpower of choice. If you would have chosen, I don't think I want to fight this, we wouldn't be talking right now. The power of the choice that she gave you is remarkable to me,
Yes.
because when you make that decision, you make that choice, like you said, now you own it. Now you're ready to go. If she wouldn't have given you that power of choice and she would have said, well, John, we're going to fight this and we'll see how it goes. And
Right.
then all of a sudden you can't choose one way or the other. It's out of your control. It's out of your choice. Amazing story to me. Amazing.
A lot of times folks follow up where there's surgeries where you thought you might die,
Yeah.
where there are nights where you thought like, and to whatever their question is around life and death, there were a lot of other fears, man, many, 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 but it was never death for me. When she laid that out, the resolution was already done. We didn't know how we were going to get there,
Mm-hmm.
but we knew how the story was going to end. It was going to end with this little boy coming home. I don't think any of us knew how difficult it would be.
Unbelievable. And your dad visited. Very interesting story. Very integral part of your life, your dad and his influence on you. What was that like when your dad first visited you?
Well, man, I'll get emotional. I know you and I share a common love of baseball, but more importantly, dads, in
Yeah.
particular, our own.
Yes.
So how fortunate we were raised by great men and still have great men in our lives.
Yes.
I had a great man in my life named Denny O'Leary, business owner. You would have loved him, Visage members. For those of you out there in the audience listening, great business owner, great leader, veteran, good dude, and type A, and driven, and held people accountable, and tough when you messed up. All fair attributes.
Yeah.
But that morning, man, I feel like I'd messed up worse than ever before in my entire life. I burned down the man's house. So if I'm being real with you, my thought that day was all around my dad's going to kill me.
Mm-hmm.
This is before my mom walked in, before I met the doc. I knew my dad was he was going to be furious. And then I hear his voice down the hall, like kind of yelling at a nurse, "Where is my boy, John?" And I'm 9, Joe. I remember thinking, oh, gosh, I hope he doesn't find me. The old man's come to finish me off. This nurse brings him back into the room, pulls back the curtain. He walks in, points down and says, "John, look at me when I'm talking to you." So I look up and then he says, "I have never been so," and there was a pause. And then he goes, "proud of anyone in my entire life. And my little buddy today, this morning, I'm just proud to be your dad." And then he adds, "I love you. I love you. I love you. And there's nothing you can do about it." And as a little boy, this is all true story. I remember crossing my arms the best I could and shutting my eyes as tight as I could and thinking, oh my gosh, nobody told my dad what happened.
Yeah.
The man must not know I burned down the house.
Yeah.
But what your father taught you was, yeah, the gift of being somewhere on time and pulling your shoulders back and doing things right. But also what both of our fathers taught us is the gift of grace and the transformational power of being loved,
Mm-hmm.
regardless of what we do. So my dad modeled that on the day I was burned. He continues to model it today. And yeah, as important as my mother's tough conversation with me was, equally important was my father's. It's almost like switching roles. To my right over here, I have a Rembrandt, a fake Rembrandt picture of the prodigal son. And it's Rembrandt could paint anything he wanted perfectly. Well, he paints the prodigal father with this very tender left hand, very dainty, very small, weak, and this very masculine right hand, very strong, very firm, knowing that to be truly love, you need both playing together. You need this loving, embracing, grace-filled hand and this tough, resilient one that holds you accountable. That day, I received both versions of love from my mom and my dad.
And I think it's a great story of leadership. I don't think it should be any different in the business world, in the athletic world, the parenting world. Two attributes you just said about leadership was being truthful and honest, which is what your mom was with you, which everyone deserves that from the leader that they're being led by. Truthful and honest. And the second one is grace. That you're going to make mistakes. And as a true leader, you're going to have grace to show people that they can learn from this and get better from it.
Yes.
Amazing story. The next story I want to get to real quick, because we're going pretty quick, but I got so much to go over with you. But I want to go over this story because it's another leadership story. The first time you tried to eat. I've heard this story. It's a great story. Again, your mom's giving you the power of choice here.
Because my mom is such a pain in the neck. I'm telling you, like this woman is 11 times the parent that I am today. And that's not a credit to me. You know what I mean? Like my mother knew how to parent, how to teach, how to lead, which means she did the difficult things at every turn. Because that's the stuff we don't want to do as leaders.
Right,
it's easier to sweep it under the mat or do it for them. It'll take me longer to explain it. I'll just do it. Well, maybe the first time. But once we equip them, watch out, they'll pass us, which is what we long for. So you're bringing up another painful story, but it's such a good one. And it is not about parenting a child through burn recovery. This is about leading. So I come home from the hospital. It was a journey. But one ultimately we accomplished together. Had a big party that day. My mother makes a huge dinner that night. I'm in a wheelchair. We're seated around the table. The house has been rebuilt. There's a dog to my left and my mother to my right. And as my mother plates all the meals, what I recognize very quickly is I can't eat this. So I kind of give my sister one of those looks and she picks up on it. She's an empathetic lady. She's 11, I'm 9. She grabs a fork, picks up some potatoes, moves them toward my mouth. And right as I'm about to begin eating, satisfying my hunger, my mother looks at Amy, my sister, and says, Amy, drop the fork. If John is hungry, he's going to feed himself tonight.
Wow.
And wow, was right. I remember looking at my sister like in awe, and then at my mom in shock, like kind of shrugging my shoulders and saying like, I can't, and just waiting for Amy to feed me. And then as the silence continued, my mother says, Amy, if he's hungry, he will feed himself. And Joe, on your podcast, we don't have enough time to act out the entire scene. But by the end of the night, it took 2.5 hours. The plate had been flipped 3 different times. The dogs had been fed well. The kitchen had been cleaned. And my mother remained steadfast to my right in that chair with me. That's important to recognize, with me. But 2.5 hours in, a little boy who earlier that night could not feed himself figured out how to wedge a fork between his 2 fingerless, broken, useless hands, wedge the little potatoes onto the end of the fork, scoop them toward his mouth, and begin eating. And when we wrote a book in 2016 called On Fire, and that story came out in a parenting magazine. And many of the folks who read that parenting magazine criticized my mother, like being cruel and unusual. What they don't recognize is she raised a boy who travels the world now as a speaker, who changes his own kids' diapers, who is highly able to type and write and eat and anything else. I worked construction for 14 years. How? because I had a mother who reminded me when I thought I could not, that I could. That's a really difficult lesson to learn. And it is maybe the most important lesson we can teach our kids or our players or our coaches or our teams in life.
Well, and I think what people don't understand too is probably how hard that was on your mom to do that, in terms of, how gut-wrenching that had to be to sit there and watch you try to do that. But she knew that she wasn't always going to be able to be there for you. And at some point, you're going to have to be there for yourself. Just an extraordinary story. And I think we need to preface that or we need to say that your fingers were amputated during this whole 5-month process in the hospital. And that's why you were having a hard time. I want to jump into this, John, and because I think this is a fascinating story. Jack Buck. Jack Buck, for those of you who don't know, is legendary St. Louis Cardinals radio, TV announcer. Announced so many unbelievable athletic events during my lifetime and so forth. Is just a legend. What role did he play in your recovery? Not just physical recovery,
Right.
but your mental recovery.
So the name many of your viewers and listeners know is Joe Buck.
Right.
And Joe just keeps going into the Hall of Fame, like various Hall of Fames, baseball, football, broadcast, but every time he goes in, they say he's the first father's son to be inducted.
Yeah.
So when you reference Jack as a great baseball and football and media and like any Hall of Fame out there, this man is in. And more than that, he's a phenomenal human. So I love Joe quite a bit, but his dad was a titan of a man. And I never met him, of course, because he's busy. He's a broadcaster. He's famous. He's on the road a lot. When he's not on the road, he's doing charitable work. So I never met Jack Buck live. But as a child, I certainly looked up to him. So that's the background of the story.
Right.
I get burned. Go ahead.
Go ahead. This is amazing.
It just is. So I get burned on a Saturday, and by Sunday morning, I'm tied down to a hospital bed. I can't move. That's how they treated burn patients back in the day. I have a trach, so I can't talk. I can't breathe on my own. I can't eat or drink. My eyes are swollen shut, so I can't see. So, I'm without all my senses, except I could dream, I could hope, I could pray, I could set goals like going home, and I could listen. So there's, get ready for it because I could listen. And I remember the day after I get burned, I'm listening to beeps and I'm listening to people moving around my room. And then I listen as the door opens up. I hear footsteps walk in. Somebody walks in, they sit down, they pull the chair up close, and then I hear the voice of Jack Buck, not on the radio, not on the television, not talking about baseball, but speaking to me as a human being. And he says, and if I had a better voice right now, I'd say it louder, but here it comes. Kid, wake up. Wake up. You are going to live. You're going to survive. Keep fighting. John O'Leary Day at the ballpark will make it all worthwhile. Kid, are you listening? I try to nod, and then he responds, good. Keep fighting. And then this brilliant, beautiful, busy guy stands. He walks out. He leaves a child tied down by himself in a hospital bed dying. And Joe changed. People think I'm a raw optimist, and I guess I am because I know the power of one person to change the life of another. And when we do that at scale, we can change a family, we can change culture, we can change business. That's why I love Vistage. We can change the world. One life at a time is how it's always been done. That day, Jack walked in one time and changed a little boy's life. When he walked out, he was told by the staff that the little boy was going to die. They said there is no reason for hope. And when this diagnosis comes into our health, with a diagnosis in a family, in a business, whatever the thing is, what we do next influences what happens next. What the great Jack Buck did, guy from the greatest generation, guy who grew up in the Depression, went off to war, picked up a couple Purple Hearts, knew struggle and overcoming. What he did is he went home, cried, prayed, reflected and journaled on one question. What more can I do? What more can I do? It's a great question to make tomorrow better than today. And then the following day, and then I'll leave it here, but the following day, I'm laying in a hospital bed on a Monday. The door opens up. Jack Buck walks back in and says, "Kid, wake up. I'm back. You
Wow.
are going to live.
Wow.
You are going to survive. Keep fighting. John O'Leary Day at the ballpark will make it all worthwhile."
Unbelievable. And then you you recovered, you came home, and you got something in the mail.
Well, yeah, and it came in the mail because he visited me every day for the next 5 months after that first visit and then the second. So it just shows his commitment not to be a social media celebrity because he wasn't doing this for the fame. He cared about people.
Yeah, no one knew.
No, he never told a soul.
Yeah.
Although he talked about it on the radio quite a bit, like, "How's my friend John O'Leary?" So when he was
Yeah.
out of town, he would talk about it. Then he brought me downtown. We had John O'Leary Day at the ballpark. And it's that night he learned I can't do anything with my little hands. So the following day, I think it's August 27th, I get a baseball in the mail signed by Ozzie Smith. It's a name you recognize.
Yeah.
Shortstop for the Cardinals. Below the ball was a note from Jack that read, "Kid, if you want a second baseball, write a thank you letter to the guy who signed the first." And, Joe, I can't write.
Yeah.
I'm a victim. I can't do a thing, and I can barely eat. That's hard enough. I'll never write. But I wanted a baseball desperately. So with the help of my beautiful mom, there she is again. She's in every frame in the movie. She's in them all, and a therapist on the other side. They push my hands together. We mail and write a little note to Ozzie Smith. Mailed it off, and 2 days later, I got that second baseball, which was awesome. Tragically, below the ball was a note that read, "Kid, if you want a third baseball." Oh, you got it. So I wrote another baseball note, and then another, and then another. And a long story made very short. That summer, the Cardinals went to the playoffs and then the World Series. A busy guy named Jack Buck sent a little nobody named John O'Leary 60 baseballs, 60. The generosity involved in going up to 60 ball players and having 60 of them hear the same darn story about a burn kid, and then 60 times going to a post office, 60 times getting the rights. Like the whole thing is unbelievable. And he never told a soul. He just served.
And again, the power of choice. He gave you a choice. If you want more, you can choose to have more. But he challenged you, which I think is another great trait of leaders, is they challenge the people they lead, because challenging your people gives them confidence.
That's right.
Establishes confidence in them, and the confidence that you had now that I can write now. I can't. Your mom gave you the confidence. I can eat. Jack Buck gave you the confidence. I can write.
That's right.
And you chose to do that, though, John. You chose to do that. You could have chose the other way.
I'm bad at accepting compliments. I acknowledge that. I really feel like though I was pulled along for the ride. These folks set up barriers they knew I could hurdle, and they sat with me and crawled with me and eventually limped forward with me, and then eventually hurdled over them with me. So although you are right, I made the choice. I did, but I made it with a mother's gentle hand on my right
Sure.
and a therapist tougher hand on my left. And so leadership, because I know you're a leadership podcast. We change the world by reminding people of what remains possible in their life when
Right.
they don't yet see it.
Right. And I always say that, the old saying that life's a marathon. It's not a marathon, it's a steeplechase. Steeplechase and track is a long distance race that has a bunch of different hurdles on it. And you're describing that perfectly in your journey here. I want to go a little bit into this, John, and I know this is really had a profound effect on your life. When Jack Buck was sick, was in the hospital, he was in the hospital for 5 months as well. You had a hard time or couldn't go see him. And then I want you to go over a little bit the story of fear at Jack Buck's funeral.
Wow. So I know where you and I met originally. I don't remember sharing that story because it's so painful. It's so personal and so real. So I'm glad you know about it and you're bringing it up because I think it applies to our leaders' lives far more than being burned. If I'm being super honest, like this is something we all have done from time to time in one way or another. So you're hearing a story about a man who just invested in me and clearly loved me
From his
with
heart.
from his heart, man. Like, and just did the right stuff repeatedly over decades. The problem with worth is if you don't feel worthy of the gifts you've received, you also don't feel worthy of using them for good. So we're going to come back to that one because that's a really big line, I think. If you don't feel worthy of the talents, of the gifts, of the investment others have made in you, you will not feel worthy of investing that same talent or gift or love into others. So this man spent a lifetime pouring into me, but I never felt worthy of any of it. I was grateful for it, but unworthy. Jack got Parkinson's disease, something you and I know well because we love our dads.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a disease I was familiar with. In addition to Parkinson's, he also got cancer, was diagnosed with cancer, spent 5 months in hospital. That's the exact same amount of time I spent in hospital. So this is my chance near the end of his life to make it amends. So for my brothers in AA out there, you know about the power of this, man, make amends. Well, here's my chance. And yet, if you don't feel worthy of the gifts, you don't feel worthy of giving them back. So over the course of 5 months, several times I got into a car to go down there, but would find some excuse not to. All of them, though, going back to the fact that he probably had someone else already visiting, someone more important, someone more worthy. So I never visited my friend near the end of his life.
Mm-hmm.
When he passed away, his family called to share the news, and they asked me to go to the funeral. So I was brokenhearted that this man in my life had passed away, that I had not seen him. But eventually, 3 days after I get the call, I put on my cheap $19 suit and $3 tie, look on YouTube on how to tie this thing, figure it out, get in my old Jeep, drive out to this church. I'm fixing my tie in the mirror, and I look to my left, and there's a Mercedes that pulls up next to me. And Dan Dierdorf is a big-time offensive lineman for the Cardinals, football Cardinals, and a huge CBS broadcaster, gets out of the Mercedes. I'm like, whoa. So that's cool. But then I look to my right, and I see someone else famous. And then I see the Cardinal ownership group walk behind me, and ball players, and the who's who of St. Louis and beyond show up for their friend. People who I recognize, not only I recognize their faces, I also recognize they were there for him. And I wasn't. So I waited for all these folks to stream into that church. I waited for the last one to pull the door shut. Waited a few more moments. Loosened the tie, turned the car back on, and reversed out. So that you do life with people, you recognize that everybody's got stories that they wish they did not have as part of their life. That, like, out of everything I've done, I've made so many mistakes. This is up there. This is a Mount Rushmore mistake, to not only not visit your friend, but to pull out of the parking lot of his funeral before you go in. It breaks me. So I recognize if I'm not there for him in life, I can't be there for him in death. So I left, made it about halfway home, and then the waterworks turned on, man. I just started weeping.
Yeah.
The kind you see, some of your listeners may have never experienced this. I had not before. I've only done it maybe twice since. So it's not common for me, but I just let it out. Pulled over on the side of the road, thought about all the things that happened to me, all the times he'd been there, all that he'd given, all the chances I had to give back, the mess up even today. And then as I'm breaking down there, recognizing also a chance to do something different in my life, to be renewed, to rise from these ashes. So even if I could not attend that funeral, it was too late already. What if I could live differently? So I just started. There's a lot more to the recovery than this, but I just started. I had never really told my parents what they'd done for me and how grateful I was. So when I got home that day, I called them and said, let's go out to lunch. Took them out to lunch, never picked up a tab for them. I'm only 22, bought their lunch and told them how much I loved them and how many times they were there for me. All they did. That was unusual. I called my grandparents. I just stopped by their house. I never stopped by without being invited. Told my grandpa, who was my hero, that he was my hero. Told my grandmother that I know of no one better than she. Just two amazing parents, our grandparents and parents. I went back and became a hospital chaplain. Part of the reason I never visited Jack is because I'm terrified of hospitals.
Yeah, I can imagine.
I don't want to go back. But then I realized in that swing and miss, well, you got to face the fear and come right at it. So I did. I became a hospital chaplain, got to spend 3 years working with sick kids, became a big brother, realized what Jack ultimately was for me was my big. So I became active in Big Brothers Big Sisters, partnered up with
Wow.
one little boy, watched that relationship all the way through 9 years, watched this kid graduate high school, first one, and then college, became a pastor. This is a good man. We've done it now again. Like, just keep checking boxes, even to the point of eventually I got married. Our first son, he's not named John, he's named Jack.
Yeah.
So this man, although I wasn't there for him, he was there for me. And now I'm trying to make a life. I'm trying to make amends. I'm trying to make Jack Buck, my friend, proud of the life I'm living.
Unbelievable story. And you talked about something about having no regrets. Tell me about that. I have a saying that says fear regret. As a
Hmm.
leader, I never want any people I lead to have any regrets when they're done. So you've said one thing I read was, "Are you free?" Can you talk a little bit about that, and then the regret part?
Yeah, well, you did your homework. So that this is not coming from the book In Awe. So you're really making me straddle the fence now between my two kids. Pick a favorite one, John, and walk forward with that one. So In Awe is another cool book about recognizing that children naturally exude joy, not happiness. There's a difference. They just exude joy. And then as they age, as we age, adults, we slowly give that back. They naturally exhibit curiosity and candor and
Mm-hmm.
freedom. And as we age, we slowly give all these things back. So I watched that as a parent. And I wondered, what is it that my children have? I have four. What do they have that I'm missing out on? Why do we? And how do we return to it? And one of them was this idea of freedom. Like, kids, my goodness, they are so liberated. But some adults we know are as well. Jack Buck was one of them, just like
Mm-hmm.
free to show fully. So the question is, like, are you free? Are you really free? So there's several different stories from the book and from my life where that plays in. One of my favorites, though, actually takes place not in a hospital, not in a schoolhouse, but in a prison. And I was speaking to about 90 prisoners. These guys are lifers. This is Fort Leavenworth. These guys are wearing orange jumpsuits, and they're not coming out. And we did an exercise that day on gratitude, which is an unusual thing. But I wanted them to go through this exercise of recognizing that life can take a whole lot of things away from them, but it can't necessarily steal your joy. You get to choose that one.
Mm-hmm.
So I had them go through this exercise. Then after that exercise, we went through another one. So as a result of being imprisoned here in Fort Leavenworth, this miserable 1920s built monument to the mob. This is to scare the mob into choosing differently. I'm serious. It's a horrible place. What are you grateful for being here? And then I played Amazing Grace on the piano while they're taking notes. I stood up and I said, anybody want to share? Anybody want to share? There was a guy about midway back who said, I'll share. So he stands and then he says, he reads word for word, Joe, not one damn thing. And he sits down and everybody starts laughing. So whether it's at Vistage or in leadership or counseling, one of the questions we like to ask is, after you say, well, thank you for that, the next question is, anybody else?
Yeah.
Anybody else? So I'm looking around the room. There's a fellow in the back row. I still remember his hair and face, kind of a rusty brown orange hair, a little bit long and unkept. He stands, he shares, looks down at his list. He says, as a result of being here in this prison, I'm grateful for. And then he goes, 3 square meals, heat in the winter, air in the summer. Never had either of those things growing up. The ability to learn how to read. Never learned when I was in grade school. Learn how to read. Access to the library. Access to the internet. Chance at redemption. It goes on and on and on. Running water. Hot showers. Never had any of this growing up, this guy says. Never had any of it. When he sits down, because this is another cool story. When he sits down, everybody in that prison rose, stood, and applauded.
Wow.
The first man, both of these guys are prisoned for life.
Yeah.
When he sat back down, everybody cheered with laughter. Isn't he great? Funny. When the next man shared, everybody cheered, celebrating what real freedom looks like. So, man, like, are you free? This isn't like, well, are you financially free? Have you paid off the debt? Have you made it to the top of the mountain? Looked out at how great and accomplished you are. That's not at all what freedom is. Kids know this. We lose sight of this. So part of freedom is recognizing the profound blessings that are in your life now.
Right.
And what you can do to make the life even better and bigger, not only for you, but for those around you.
And I always like to tell people you'll find your perspective when your perspective is greater than yourself. And you kind of described that there. We're very limited on time. I did want you to go over your I really want to dive in. Maybe we can do another one if you have time. Because I really want to dive into mindset. There's a lot of things that happened in your life where you could have chosen the other way. And I really would like to dive into that sometime, but I want to get into this real quick before you go.
Let me speak to mindset super quickly. Even today, the reality is you and I are on the phone. I don't feel good. My voice doesn't normally sound like this. I'm not getting paid for this time. It's easy to hit an email, say, hey, Joe, can we reschedule? And you would have graciously said, of course. But I learned as a child, when you make a commitment, you live into it.
Yeah.
And I didn't learn that because I'm good. I learned that because my parents were.
Right.
And they insisted we can do better. So part of mindset is recognizing you can't always choose the path you walk in life, but you can always choose the manner in which you walk it.
There's that power of choice again.
But that's my mindset. You get to choose. That prisoner taught us. Those two guys had the same lousy life, but they also had the same 4 square meals or 3 square meals and heat and air and running water and on and on and on the list goes. So choose carefully with mindset.
Amazing. John, we got 2 minutes in. Your 3 simple truths are this. I'll just say them. Our life is sacred. It's an awesome gift. We get to choose our mindset in every situation, no matter how bleak it seems. It's power of choice again. And together we can change the world, starting with our own. I want to leave that with our people. But I always ask people, I wrote a book called The 3 Ps, Find Your Purpose, Perspective, and Passion. That's usually how I finish my podcast. We don't have time for that today. Maybe we can later, but I kind of know what your purpose and passions are. And the perspective is what holds it together. But I want you to give a chance. How can people see more of what you do? What's your website? How do they get your books and so forth?
So, and I'll share the first P because it's why I'm with you today, actually. The purpose of my life is this. I choose to thrive. So if you're trying to design purpose statements, one way to do so, there's many, is to say, I choose to thrive because fill in the blank. And then after you do it once, cross that one out and do it again. Do it for years, and then you got it. So here's mine. I choose to thrive because God demands it. My family deserves it. The world is starved for it. Let's roll.
Wow.
No excuses.
Oh, I love it.
So that's my purpose. That's why I speak.
Cool.
After you and I wrap up, I'm going to go down and I got to do a radio show. My voice is off. I don't feel good, but hey, I choose to thrive because God demands it. Family deserves it. The world is starved for it. Let's roll. That's language from 9/11. Let's roll. No excuses. You asked about how people can stay in touch. We've got a website called johnolearyinspires.com. johnolearyinspires.com. And once you cruise all over there, you can learn more about our podcast. It's called Live Inspired. You can learn more about our books, On Fire or In Awe. You can learn more about our community. We got a community of people who believe in the power of changing the world one life at a time, starting with their own. We don't charge for it. We want you to come on in. We want you to make a difference with us. So, we're trying to do a lot of things because your life is sacred. Your life matters, and the best is yet to come.
Amazing stuff. And I want to leave people with this. John had a choice at 9 years old in probably the most pain that any of us could ever imagine, to be bitter or to be better. And you have chosen not only to make your life better, but millions of other people's lives better. And I thank you for that. That's what this world is about. Using your gifts in the service of others is what this is all about. That's what you do, and that's what you encourage others to do. You're an amazing man. This is a great start to a great relationship. I'm going to be picking your brain a lot. And I just appreciate you so much for taking the time, even when you're not feeling well, to come on and inspire others.
Joe, I thank you for modeling this, man. Today, you and I just hold up a mirror reminding people what's possible in their lives.
Yeah, it's amazing. You're an amazing man. Thank you so much for listening to this week's edition of People Progressing Podcast. All I can say is, wow. This has been amazing. You can get a hold of me through Coach Joe White 97 at gmail.com or Coach Joe White Consulting.com. John, thanks again. And everyone out there, keep progressing. Thank you.
Thank you, Joe.